Hi, I'm Professor Simon Defendini and I would like to welcome you again to Module 5. In this video we will tackle the subject of common biases and errors in decision making. Typically, leaders in their quest for maximizing efficiency and minimizing the time invested in a difficult decision, they tend to rely too heavily on experience, impulses, gut feeling, and convenient rules of thumb. As a result, individuals erroneously decide using the most common biases in decision making. Let's start this session with the first 4 of such a biases: overconfidence bias, anchoring bias, confirmation bias, and availability bias. The first bias we will review is the overconfidence bias, which is the likelihood of overestimating the probability of being correct. This bias tends to decrease as intellectual and interpersonal abilities increase. In essence, knowledge reduces overconfidence. The second is the anchoring bias, or tendency to fixate on the initial information received and fail to adjust the course of action due to a later and reasonably more accurate information. The first information obtained will be the basis for the complete deciding process, no matter what additional information is received later. The third we will tackle is the confirmation bias, which represents a specific case of selective perception. Information used in the decision-making process is collected selectively, and only information that reaffirms past choices is amplified, while data that contradicts those choices is disregarded. In sum, information that agrees with preconceived points of view is accepted at face value, while opposite information is analyzed skeptically. The fourth is availability bias, which refers to the tendency for people to base their judgments on information that is available to them. Emotional, vivid, recent events tend to be readily available in the minds of the decision maker and therefore carry a more pronounced influence and weight in the decisions they take. This bias causes people to overestimate the probabilities of unlikely but vivid events and underestimate the risk of more likely but less dramatic incidents. Finally, availability bias can also explain why managers give more weight in performance appraisals to recent employees' behavior rather than behaviors of 6 to 9 months earlier. Now let's study the following 4 biases and errors: escalation of commitment, randomness error, risk aversion, and hindsight bias. Let's start with escalation of commitment, which refers to staying with an initial decision through a series of subsequent decisions, even when there is a clear evidence that the initial decision was wrong. This bias often occurs when the decision maker views himself as responsible for the failure. Now let's focus on the randomness error. This error is the perception that most of us like to think we have some control over the world that surrounds us. That's why we tend to believe we can predict the outcome of random events and establish causal relationships between those events. Typically, decision-making becomes impaired when we try to create meaning out of those unrelated and random events. It's time to assess risk aversion, or the tendency to prefer a sure thing over a risky outcome. Arguably, nearly everyone but committed gamblers would rather have an assured business than a questionable but potentially better prospects. Risk aversion bias has an important implication in business, from compensation to employees to the business strategy itself. Related to compensation, companies use higher total compensation to commission employees versus those on straight salaries. This practice is to offset the risks inherent in commission-based wage. Another angle of risk aversion relates to the inertia employees demonstrate when sticking with the established way of doing things, rather than taking a risk on innovative or creative methods, hindering novel but necessary initiatives. In terms of strategy, employees will continue to work in a proven past manner to minimize short-term risk, leading to stagnation in the long run. Paradoxically, most managers and top executives can be particularly risk adverse, perhaps because they don't want to lose, want to gamble, everything they have worked so hard. That's the case of a CEO at risk of being terminated, who is exceptionally risk adverse, even when a riskier investment strategy is in the firm's best interest. Finally, we will assess hindsight bias, or the tendency to erroneously believe that once the outcome of an event is known, its results could have been accurately predicted in the past. This bias reduces our ability to learn from the past and falsely inflates our opinions of our ability to make accurate predictions. Thanks for your attention, and we will meet again in the upcoming OB video. Bye-bye.